You're going to die today. Not metaphorically. Not eventually. Today. In about 6 hours, an axe will catch you just below the ribs while you're trying to hold a shield wall on a muddy English beach. But here's the thing that would surprise you most. That's not even the worst way you could go. Because here's what nobody tells you about being a Viking warrior. The axe isn't what you should fear. It's the 3-inch cut on your hand from 2 weeks ago that's now streaking red up your arm. It's the parasites you picked up from sleeping in that longhouse with 30 men and their goats. It's the tooth that's been aching for months and is now producing so much pus you can taste it. It's the fact that you're 22 years old and already considered middle-aged. Want to know something even more surprising? You're not actually a warrior. Not really. 3 months ago, you were a farmer. Your training consisted of wrestling your cousins and practicing with an axe you usually used for chopping firewood. You own exactly one weapon, a spear your grandfather made, and a wooden shield that already has a crack in it from the last raid. The man next to you wearing an iron helmet and chainmail, he's worth more than your entire village. You're wearing wool, just wool, and that romantic image of fearless Viking raiders sailing off to seek glory? Here's the truth that the sagas won't tell you. You're terrified. Not of dying. You've been taught to expect that since childhood. You're terrified of starving. Last winter, you watched your youngest sister waste away because there simply wasn't enough food. This raid isn't about honor or Valhalla. It's about survival. You're not a warrior. You're a desperate farmer with a spear, gambling your life because the alternative is watching your family die slowly. Still think you could survive even one day as a Viking warrior. In 2015, archaeologists examining skeletal remains from an 11th century cemetery in northern Iceland made it up. Discovery that shattered our romantic notions of Viking health. These weren't the robust, healthy warriors of legend. Every single adult skeleton showed evidence of chronic disease. Sinus infections that had eaten into bone. Dental abscesses that had gone untreated for years. Arthritis so severe that simply walking would have been agony. And here's the twist. These were the survivors. The ones who made it to adulthood. Somewhere between 30 and 40% of Viking children never made it that far. So welcome to the real Viking Age, where the word Viking didn't even mean warrior. It meant pirate or raider, and most Scandinavians never went on a single raid. Where those fearsome longships that struck terror across Europe were actually floating death traps that killed as many men through drowning and exposure as enemy weapons ever did. Where the greatest killer wasn't the sword or the axe, but disease, which claimed more lives than every battle combined. This isn't the story backed by saga poems and Hollywood imagination. This is the story backed by archaeology, skeletal remains, and the cold mathematical reality of medieval life expectancy. Over the next hour, we'll strip away every myth and reveal what it actually meant to be a Viking warrior, assuming you even survived long enough to become one. Here's the first surprise that changes everything. There was no Viking Warrior Academy, no boot camp, no formal military training at all. The path to becoming a Viking warrior began the same way most Viking boys' lives began, in shit. Literal shit. You'd wake up in a longhouse that smelled of smoke, unwashed bodies, and livestock manure because the cows and goats lived at the other end of your home. Your first training of the day? Hauling that manure out to the fields. But here's the revelation. That backbreaking farm labor was your training. When you lifted heavy rocks to clear a field, you were building the strength needed to hold a shield for odds. Hours. When you rowed a small boat to check fishing nets, you were developing the endurance to row a longship across the North Sea. When you chopped wood from dawn until dusk, you were perfecting the same motion you'd use to split an enemy's skull. The Vikings didn't separate warrior training from daily life because they couldn't afford to. There was no leisure class of professional soldiers. You were a farmer who could kill, or you were dead. The formal martial training that did exist was brutal. Based on saga accounts and later Scandinavian wrestling traditions, we can reasonably infer that Glima, Viking wrestling, was practiced outside year-round. Blizzards, freezing rain, storms, none of it mattered. Archaeological evidence of bone fractures in young males suggests this training was rough enough to cause serious injuries. No mats, no safety equipment, just ice-hard ground and the expectation that you'd learn to fight through pain or live with being called a coward. Here's the twist though. Most of what we thought was warrior culture was actually just being Norwegian in the 800s culture. Analysis of skeletal remains from Viking trading towns shows similar patterns of bone stress and old fractures as in warrior graves. Everyone was training all the time because everyone's life depended on physical toughness. The warriors who raided England weren't a separate military class. They were the same farmers who happened to own a spear. Swimming was essential and terrifying. The Norse valued swimming so highly that saga accounts mention it as a mark of a complete man. Given that falling overboard in armor meant drowning, this makes grim practical sense. But swimming practice meant freezing water, often with ice floating in it. Boys learned not for recreation, but for survival. And the psychological conditioning was perhaps most important. From childhood, boys were taught that their death day was already determined by fate. Weird. This belief shows up in runic inscriptions and saga poetry. Fighting fate was futile. Whether Vikings truly believed this, or whether it was a psychological tool to manage fear, the result was the same. Warriors who could face overwhelming odds without breaking. Here's the reveal. This warrior training never ended. Archaeological excavations of potential homegang sites, formal dueling grounds on small islands, show evidence of prepared fighting areas, suggesting regular combat practice throughout a warrior's life. These served as both legal proceedings and ongoing training for men who might be farmers today, but raiders next season. Let me shatter another myth with a single fact. According to the Laxdæla saga, one Viking sword was valued at half a crown, the equivalent of 16 milk cows. To put that in perspective, 16 cows represented more wealth than most farmers accumulated in a lifetime. You'd be lucky to own one cow. Archaeological evidence shows the vast majority of warrior graves contain exactly 3 items: a spear, a shield, and maybe an axe. No sword, no helmet, no armor. Norwegian law codes like the Gulating Law confirm this by specifying that free men were required to own a spear and shield for local defense. Not because these were the best weapons, but because these were what people could actually afford. Spears were everywhere because they were practical. Archaeological excavations show spearheads ranging from small javelin points to massive blades over half a meter long. The wooden shaft could be made locally from ash wood. Finding a spear in a grave barely registers as noteworthy to archaeologists. They're that common. Axes were even more democratic. Your axe cut wood on Monday and men on Tuesday. But here's where it gets interesting. Archaeological finds from the late Viking Age show the emergence of the Dane axe. Massive two-handed weapons with blade edges up to 46 centimeters long, requiring significant skill to wield. This suggests specialization in warfare was beginning to emerge, but for most of the Viking Age, your axe was just your axe. Now let's talk about what you couldn't afford. Everything else. Swords are so rare in archaeological finds that their presence marks a grave as wealthy. The famous Ulfbert swords, about 170 examples discovered, all bearing the inlaid inscription, were made with high-quality steel that analysis shows was far beyond most Scandinavian smithing capabilities. These were probably Frankish imports. Most warriors never touched a sword, ever. Helmets? The Germanbu helmet from Norway, found in 1943, is one of the only complete examples. Each Viking helmet discovery generates scholarly excitement because they're that rare. Most warriors fought bareheaded, meaning any blow to the head could kill instantly. And here's the big reveal. armor was even rarer. Creating a mail shirt required thousands of individually riveted iron rings. A Norwegian study estimated that a single mail shirt in 1066 cost more than building a defensive fortification. Archaeological finds of mail are so uncommon that each discovery generates scholarly papers. Some well-preserved examples show rings as small as 4 millimeters in diameter, each one individually riveted. Staggering labor. So what did you wear? Multiple layers of wool, possibly leather, though evidence suggests leather was expensive, not cheap material as movies suggest. Your only real protection was your shield. An analysis of the few complete finds shows shields shattered easily. Contemporary battle accounts and physical evidence from excavated battlefields show fragments of destroyed shields, supporting saga accounts that warriors carried multiples because they expected to go through them. Even weapon quality varied dramatically. Analysis of excavated Viking weapons shows some with simpler construction, evidence of repairs, bending, or lower quality materials. The wealthy warrior with an Ulfbert sword had a massive survival advantage over you and your bent spear. The equipment gap wasn't just unfair, it was often fatal. And that's the reality sagas don't emphasize. Most warriors died because they couldn't afford not to. Here's the reveal that changes everything. That fearsome warrior preparing to raid England? 3 months ago, he was ankle deep in pig shit, praying his crops wouldn't fail again. Most Vikings never went on raids. Most were farmers desperately trying to survive in one of the harshest climates in Europe. And the ones who did raid, they weren't seeking glory. They were seeking dinner. Archaeological evidence from settlement excavations paints a picture far from saga legends. Most structures are farmhouses, not fortresses. Pollen analysis and ancient seed studies show attempted cultivation of barley, oats, and rye in soil, barely suitable for growing anything. The medieval warm period just meant Scandinavia went from impossible to farm to barely possible to farm. Your day. Wake before dawn. No alarm, just gradually lightening sky, that in summer comes at 3 a.m. and in winter barely comes at all. Work for 12 to 16 hours. Archaeological skeletal analysis shows bone stress markers consistent with extreme physical labor from early childhood. Your spine would show compression damage by age 20. Living conditions? You shared a longhouse. Excavated foundations show structures 30 to 75 meters long, with extended family and livestock. The animals lived at one end providing heat. The central hearth had no chimney. Analysis of lung tissue from preserved remains shows evidence consistent with chronic smoke exposure. Everything smelled of wood smoke constantly. No windows in most houses. At night during winter, near total darkness for 16 hours. Archaeological evidence suggests multiple generations, plus thralls, slept in shared spaces. Disease transmission was inevitable. The diet that archaeology reveals is grim. Stable isotope analysis of Viking teeth and bones shows heavy fish and grain consumption. Surprisingly little meat. Animals were too valuable to slaughter, except on special occasions. Skeletal evidence shows markers consistent with seasonal nutritional stress, periods of adequate food, followed by shortage. Here's the twist historians recently understood. Analysis of climate data, harvest records, and raid timing patterns suggests raids intensified during periods of crop failure. You didn't raid for glory. You raided because last winter, you watched your children go hungry, and you'll do anything to prevent that again. Archaeological excavation of Viking latrines proves everyone was infected with intestinal worms. Anglo-Saxon chronicler John of Wallingford noted Vikings bathed weekly and combed hair daily, excessive by medieval standards, but still disgusting by modern standards. Climate reconstructions suggest brutal winters. Skeletal remains show evidence. consistent with cold injury, possible frostbite damage. You learn to live with perpetual discomfort. This grinding existence made raiding logical. If you're already cold, hungry, and working yourself to death, sailing to England to take wealth by force becomes reasonable. These weren't professional soldiers. These were desperate farmers whose other option was starvation. If battle was the dramatic killer, disease was the prosaic one, and it killed far more Vikings than any sword. Life expectancy in Viking Age Scandinavia was about 35 to 40 years, though infant mortality was catastrophic. 30 to 40% of children died before adulthood, based on cemetery analysis. Recent studies using CT scans and X-ray analysis of Viking skulls from Sweden reveal shocking disease levels. Sinus infections that left permanent bone changes. Ear infections, causing probable hearing loss. Dental abscesses creating agonizing pain. Osteoarthritis so severe, every movement hurt. Porotic hyperostosis, a condition from severe anemia creating porous bone tissue and holes in skulls. Tooth decay was nearly universal. Archaeological evidence shows abscesses, cavities, tooth loss, and severe periodontal disease. Imagine chronic toothache with no painkillers stronger than alcohol. Dental problems weren't just painful, they were life-threatening through blood infections. Infectious diseases were worse. Tuberculosis killed many, leaving characteristic bone lesions. Leprosy appeared in Viking populations. Research suggests early plague forms may have circulated. The mass grave at Repton, England, where the Great Heathen Army wintered in 873 to 874, contains hundreds of adult male Vikings who seem to have died of epidemic disease rather than battle wounds. Studies of Viking-era latrines show multiple intestinal worm species: whipworm, roundworm, tapeworm. Everyone had them. They caused chronic diarrhea, malnutrition, anemia, abdominal pain. There was no treatment. You just lived with them. Living conditions guaranteed disease transmission. Living with animals meant zoonotic disease exposure. Smoky, poorly ventilated longhouses damaged lungs. Poor sanitation spread fecal-oral diseases. Crowding spread respiratory infections. Treatment options were primitive. Vikings had herbal remedies, some effective, many not. They understood bone setting and wound stitching, but no germ theory, no antibiotics, no effective painkillers. Infection meant death more often than not. For you, modern person, disease would be the most immediate threat. Your immune system has no experience with medieval strains. You'd catch something within days. Maybe you'd survive. Maybe you wouldn't. But you'd understand viscerally why disease was the true terror. Not enemy warriors, but the invisible killers against which there was no defense. When Vikings fought, they didn't charge mindlessly. Real Viking warfare was methodical and terrifying. The shield wall, Skjaldborg in Peace, Old Norse, was key. Based on saga descriptions and battlefield archaeology, we can infer how it worked. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping to create a wooden wall. Behind this, spears bristle. The front rank, usually the best armored if anyone had armor, faces forward. This isn't static. The shield wall advances slowly, maintaining formation. Any gap means death. Archaeological evidence from potential holmgang sites and battlefield excavations at places like Hafrsfjord suggests Vikings trained extensively in formation fighting. Fighting in shield wall required maintaining position while pushed, shoved, screaming at. You had to thrust spears through gaps without exposing yourself. Trust the men beside you completely. Before shield walls met, archaeological evidence suggests archers and slingers peppered enemies with projectiles. Many warrior graves contain arrowheads alongside melee weapons, indicating dual weapon systems. And berserkers, saga sources, describe warriors fighting in trance-like fury, possibly enhanced by ritual practices or substances. Whether this was actual drugged frenzy or calculated psychological warfare remains debated by scholars, but the effect was real. Berserkers served as shock troops, disrupting formations through terrifying aggression. Naval warfare was different. Vikings didn't ram ships. Instead, they drew alongside and fought what was essentially a land battle on moving platforms. Boarding actions were terrifying, trying to jump between ships while both rolled with waves. Hit-and-run tactics made Vikings feared. Longships could sail up rivers where larger vessels couldn't follow, beach on any shoreline. This meant striking coastal targets with little warning, overwhelming defenders before organized resistance formed. But these tactics required intelligence gathering. Archaeological evidence and saga accounts suggest Viking traders visiting target locations before raids, bringing back information about defenses, wealth, landing sites, escape routes. Vikings were calculating and strategic, not mindless barbarians. The Viking longship enabled their expansion, but was also miserable to live on. The clinker construction, overlapping planks fastened with iron rivets, created hulls that were strong and flexible. Archaeological finds like the Gokstad and Oseberg ships show sophisticated construction, where planks were shaped using axes, then fastened with clinker rivets that could flex slightly. Different ships served different purposes. The Karvi was smaller. The Snekja was the standard warship. The Skeed was larger and prestigious. All shared characteristics. Long and narrow, 20 to 30 meters long, but only 4 to 6 meters wide. Shallow drafts of about 1 meter meant they could sail rivers, navigate shallows, and beach anywhere. They were fast. Under oar power, 5 to 6 knots. Under sail, 10 knots or more. This was faster than most contemporary ships, giving Vikings crucial tactical advantage. But here's what sagas don't emphasize. These ships were miserable. No below-deck shelter. Cargo stored amidships left minimal space for rowers. When it rained, often you got wet. When waves came over, often you got soaked. When wind whipped across open water, always you froze. Sleeping arrangements were minimal. Warriors slept in animal skin sleeping bags wedged wherever they could. Food was dried fish, dried meat, hardtack. Fresh water was rationed and went stagnant. Navigation was part skill, part luck. Vikings navigated by coastlines when possible, by stars when visible, by natural signs. Watercolor, seabird flight, land smell on wind. They may have used sun compasses or sunstones. Iceland spar crystals, determining sun position through clouds, though archaeological evidence for these remains debated among scholars. But navigation failed regularly. Sagas are full of accounts of ships becoming havila, bewildered, lost in fog, or storms. In those situations, you drifted, hoping wind and current carried you somewhere habitable before food and water ran out. Many ships were lost. Many crews drowned. Atlantic crossings to Iceland, Greenland, or North America took weeks in open ocean. Ships regularly sank. For every successful voyage, there were probably several ending in disaster. Archaeological evidence of skeletal remains shows Vikings survived astonishingly severe injuries. Skulls with healed sword cuts show bone knitted back together, fractured limbs that healed. Even evidence of trepanation, drilling holes in skulls, possibly to relieve pressure or possibly mystical treatment. But for every healed injury, there were probably multiple deaths. Infection was the great killer. Vikings had no germ theory. They might wash wounds with water or wine, might apply herbs with some antimicrobial properties, might burn wounds to cauterize, but mostly, they just bandaged and hoped. Saga accounts provide details, probably based on real practices. Wounded warriors were taken to field hospitals where women provided care. These healers stitched wounds, set bones, performed limited surgery. They had diagnostic techniques, examining blood color from wounds to determine if internal organs were damaged, or the famous leek soup test. Feeding wounded men soup made with leeks and onions, then smelling the wound to see if food's odor came through, indicating stomach penetration and probable fatal injury. Amputations happened. The sagas describe warriors losing limbs. Survival rates were probably low. Without antibiotics, proper surgical techniques, or adequate pain control, amputation was desperate last resort. Pain management was primitive. Alcohol was the primary painkiller. Some herbs had mild analgesic properties, but mostly, you just endured. Archaeological evidence from battle sites like Visby shows trauma injuries that some individuals survived, while others didn't. Comparison of healed versus unhealed battle injuries provides evidence that some warriors fought again after recovering from severe wounds. Let's be blunt. You would not survive as a Viking warrior. Your body is wrong, raised on abundance, modern medicine, climate control. Your training is wrong. You haven't spent 20 years learning to fight in all weathers. Your equipment would be wrong. You'd be poor, which means minimal armor and cheap weapons. Your health would be wrong. Within days, you'd accumulate parasites and diseases your body has never encountered. Your psychology would be wrong. You've been raised to value life and view violence as aberrant, while Vikings accepted death and normalized violence. The gap between modern life and Viking Age life is so vast that bridging it in any reasonable time frame would be nearly impossible. The Vikings who survived weren't superhuman. They were products of their time, shaped by brutal circumstances into people who could endure what we cannot. Archaeological evidence, skeletal remains, saga accounts, and climate data all paint the same picture. Viking life was harder than we can imagine. They didn't survive because they were tougher than us in some moral sense. They survived because they had no choice and were adapted through lifelong conditioning to circumstances that would break modern people immediately. The fire has burned low. You've traveled through the real Viking Age, not the glorious version of imagination, but the one filled with hunger, disease, cold, violence, and early death. Understanding why we wouldn't survive helps us appreciate how far human civilization has progressed and how remarkable our ancestors were. They weren't noble savages or superhuman warriors. They were people, scared, hungry, sick, but somehow keeping going anyway. They built ships that crossed oceans, established trading networks spanning continents, and left cultural legacies that still resonate today. All while dealing with challenges that would break most of us immediately. The real lesson isn't that we're weak compared to Vikings. It's that humans are remarkably adaptable to their circumstances. Vikings adapted to their brutal world. We've adapted to our comfortable one. Neither adaptation is inherently superior. They're just different responses to different challenges. As you drift towards sleep, imagine once more that windswept beach, that longship waiting, those warriors preparing. But now you understand. Not heroes from a story, but real people doing what they had to do to survive in a world that gave them few choices. They weren't trying to be legendary. They were trying to make it through another day, another winter, another year. Rest well. Tomorrow, you'll wake up in the modern world, warm, safe, with food in your kitchen and medicine in your cabinet. Be grateful for that. The Vikings who came before us built the foundation for the world we now enjoy. If you found this journey fascinating, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a like if you enjoyed this exploration of what Viking warrior life was really like. Subscribe to Sleepable History for more long-form historical narratives that cut through myths to reveal complex realities of the past. Until next time, sleep well and be grateful for the world you wake up in tomorrow.